Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Not nearly as good as my Gary Michael Capetta entry, but we will have some wrestling talk on here in the coming weeks. We had about everybody on. Ross Greenberg came on talking some hard knocks here with us this week. We put the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back together again. It's true. We're coming to Carroll County. We'll be at Hampstead next Thursday. That is the 21st, I think, if I'm doing my math right on that. We're going to be at Greenmount Station. Come on out, say hello. I'll have Raven scratch also in the Maryland Lottery. Also, our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care powering us up. And our friends at Curio Wellness and Far and Daughter, as well as our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, our clean water folks, 1-800 Clean Water, and our well water folks, putting us out on the Oyster Tour on our 26th anniversary. I'm going to break the news to Luke. Next week is International Music Day on Friday. That is the 22nd of November. And to honor that and the fact that the Ravens aren't playing until Monday night, I'm going to do a whole music thing at the end of the week to welcome in Thanksgiving and to do a recap of a bunch of music stuff we put on the radio before and a bunch of there's like a dozen Rock and Roll Hall of Famers, Luke, that I interviewed back in the day that are now in the Hall of Fame. That when I put the tapes together 10 years ago, they weren't in the Hall of Fame, and I didn't think they'd ever be in the Hall of Fame. And now I'm going to break those interviews out. So we're going to do that next week. But in the meantime, it is Pittsburgh week, sort of an elongated Pittsburgh week, right? Like, feels like, woo, they haven't played in a while and it's only the middle of the week. We're getting up on Sunday and sides are getting set. We watched the Steelers play on Sunday against the Commanders, and we've discussed that a little bit. But I find it fascinating that even Coach Harbaugh, sometimes with your prodding, has admitted that the defense is a problem. And I think, the Nile used to be a river in Egypt. It is for a lot of people who voted that way last week. But for Harbaugh to speak up that the defense has been under the microscope, I don't know. You've been at this a long time. And when have you have never seen him ranked 32nd before, but at least it's been acknowledged, maybe in a way that it isn't always at the team website, Luke.
Yeah, well, and you just said it. I mean, when you're ranked 32nd in pass defense, you're 25th in scoring defense, you're 30th in third down defense, you're tied for 20th in red zone defense, you're 27th in total defense. You're number one in rush defense, so you got that going for you, which is nice, I guess. For
Still
whatever
nobody runs
that's
the ball against you.
well, that's the thing. I mean, how valuable is it, especially in the year 2024, knowing how the game has changed? I mean, it's not 2000 anymore. You don't have teams that are just going to pound the rock against a brick wall over and over and over. These teams quickly figure out, and I've said this to you on a number of occasions over the course of the year. I've said this in watching games in the press box. I've written this at BaltimorePositive.com. At some point, if you're the opponent, you get to the point where you say, why am I even going to bother trying to run? These guys can't stop the pass. So clearly, John Harbaugh recognizes that. Clearly, Zach Gore. Clearly, these players. I mean, even after the victory last Thursday night over Cincinnati, Marlon Humphrey went as far to say that the defense are the little brothers right now. They know that. Everyone knows that. So the question is, how do you go about fixing this? Or even if fixing it isn't the right term, how do you make it better? Right? We've talked about this. You have a quarterback that's playing at an MVP level again, better than he did in his previous two MVP seasons at this point. And you have an offense that is very much on track to be the best in franchise history. And depending on various metrics you want to look at, one of the best that we've seen in the last 25 years, period, in the National Football League. So it's not as though you have to get that defense playing at an incredibly high level to think that you have a great chance to win a Super Bowl. Just get it better. Just be average. Mediocre would be okay. So easier said than done when you're now 10 games into this thing and you're still ranking where the Ravens rank right now. So they're going on the road, playing a Pittsburgh team that does not have a juggernaut of an offense. Let's call a spade, but at the same time, they have wide receivers who can catch deep balls. They have a quarterback who has taken over for Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, who is experiencing, I don't know if it's a full-blown renaissance just yet, but the signs have been favorable for Russell Wilson as a Pittsburgh Steeler, and this is going to be a good test. To your point, the extra time on the back end of the Thursday night game serves as a mini bye. You go into the lab and you try to figure this thing out. So the Ravens aren't going to broadcast how they're going to approach this, but you'd like to think that coaches, players, getting together, having a chance to self-scout, having a chance to advance scout Pittsburgh a little more than normal, that you can hopefully come up with, you know, partial solutions at the very least to make this thing look better. So we're going to see. It's a big game too, on top of that. For as much as Ravens Steelers is always a big game, this is the biggest one we've seen in quite a while,
It's
quite
a first place
frankly.
game, right? And
Yeah.
I think part of that is that they have a couple of new players. We have a couple of new players in skill position places. And more than that, with Russell Wilson, and I didn't really talk to Charlie Batch about this. We had a really long chat about being a backup and, what Fields has gone through and what Mike Tomlin's gone through and what the other players on the team are going through and what it means to be a backup and what your role is. But also for Russell Wilson, there's not a lot of tape on him in this offense, right? Or, I mean, he's played a couple of weeks. I'm sure there's still some wrinkles. There's nothing he hasn't seen. Talk about whatever Lamar is good at this point. Russell Wilson's been doing it twice as long as far as identifying things, and they have a defense there. And that's the one thing that Lamar will have to contend with and getting ready for this game is they've seen Lamar before, not as much. And to your point, Lamar hasn't always played in this game. And to make it even like a Lamar versus Steelers rivalry kind of thing. And the Russell Wilson thing is so new. It's so fresh. But that defense has been fantastic. And the offense has been good enough. I mean, even with the awful quarterbacking situation they've had the last couple of years, they've been a competitive outfit. Um, I don't know why we fall asleep on the Steelers every year and think, oh, the game's in November and they play all their division games at the end. Boy, it's almost played right into their hands a little bit if they're coming on. And this is a weekend for them to measure that because they're an underdog at home. Nobody respects the Steelers. That's an easy sell for Mike Tomlin this week.
Well, but the reality is they haven't been very good over the last 5 or 6 years. And I get it. They've made it into the playoffs, last wild card, right? They've been that team that's been good enough. And certainly when you look at just the word that I would use more than any to describe Ravens Steelers in recent years is just weird, right? Lamar hasn't played a whole lot. Kenny Pickett has beaten them a couple times, doing little more than making one or two plays over the course of a game, right? So we've seen just this weirdness to it. We've seen games where Lamar, I mean, the first COVID outbreak in 2020 that cost the game, forced the game to be postponed, three different times, and they play on a Wednesday afternoon. We've seen Lamar
Mason
be
Rudolph,
hurt.
don't forget him. He was in
Yeah,
there too. Yep.
we've seen Lamar get hurt. We've seen Lamar sit out because the Ravens have clinched, right? And on the Pittsburgh side, I mean, this Lamar Jackson era began with the end of the Ben Roethlisberger era, but we've seen Pittsburgh kind of be in this, football purgatory, for lack of a better term, in terms of,
Well, Lamar doesn't see Pittsburgh as the rival. He hadn't played in a game that feels like that. This is the week for that.
yeah, exactly. I mean, and again, this game's been weird. I mean, think about it. Think how big this game is, and it's 1 o'clock. Now, I think if Pittsburgh weren't playing a Thursday night game in Cleveland immediately following this, there's a good chance this would be the Sunday night game rather than Cincinnati Chargers.
Well, Ravens
But
Steelers, how many times do we get off that bus, you and me, and it's dark out in Pittsburgh?
right,
I mean, it was a primetime game for 2 decades, like literally.
I mean, maybe not 2 decades, but there was when you look at beginning of the Harbaugh era, the first 5, 6 years of that, first 7 years of that, let's say. I mean, some of those years, both games would be in prime time, but it was a guarantee slam dunk that one was going to be in
I
prime
remember the
time.
McNair debacle up there. I watched that game
Oh
in
yeah,
Tokyo
yeah,
back in,
that wasn't
and
fun.
was it '07, right? Oh my God, terrible.
Yeah,
'06,
but
'06, '07. Yeah, whatever year that was.
but again, it's just been these weird circumstances, beginning with the fact that again, Pittsburgh hasn't been. They haven't really been a serious contender in the AFC for 7 years. Go back to maybe 2017 was the last time. I know 20, they got off to the great start, but remember, they completely fell apart over the final 5, 6 weeks of the season where I think everyone kind of knew they were DOA in the playoffs. I mean, that's how bad they had looked at the end of the year. But I think for the Steelers, and to your point, they're a home underdog. If we're looking at this objectively, the fact that they went into Landover, beat Washington, and we don't know how real the Commanders are, but I think we think they're good. And I think that was a game, that was a win for them to kind of say, hey, maybe, they've had an early season schedule pretty favorable, but knowing their schedule gets way tougher down the stretch, that was a sign of maybe they are more formidable this year. So, I mean, certainly, regardless of records, regardless of statistics, it's Ravens Steelers, right? It's weird. It's been weird going all the way back to the beginning, right? I mean, we know that, but there's so much on the line here where you're talking about first place. You're talking about what Russell Wilson has done, albeit still a small sample. And I think, I still want to see what it looks like multiple weeks. But this is also his third straight year, I guess fourth straight year, different head coach, different offensive coordinator. Trying to show that, hey, he could still be the guy that he was in Seattle, at least close to it. I made the comparison with you, and I've seen some other people draw this comparison that that a year ago at this time we were talking, or 2 years ago even, we're talking about Russell Wilson in terms of that it was really looking bad for him. I mean, Denver was awful for him, but could this be his Kurt Warner going to Arizona kind of moment? So I think there's a lot to prove on that side. And if you're the Ravens, you have this fantastic offense. You have this team that is widely regarded as a Super Bowl contender. They're very much in that top tier. Wherever you want to put them, fine. But they're a top 5 team in the league, even with this defense being what it's been. So you need to go on the road and you need to beat Pittsburgh. Again, we can point to the games Lamar hasn't played, and obviously there's so much noise in trying to assess what's happened in these Ravens Steelers games over the last 4 or 5 years. There's no question about that. But that said, it's not just Lamar. It's the defense still having some late game breakdowns, as they did in the first game last year, as they did against Kenny Pickett on Sunday Night Football 2 years ago, where even without Lamar, you're playing at home. You had a lead in the last couple minutes of the game. It's Kenny Pickett. You got to protect the lead there. You got to close out a game, and they haven't done that. So there's a lot to prove on both sides here. And oh yeah, it's for first place in the AFC North. So I mean, as Ray Lewis would say back in the day, buckle up the chin straps. I mean, this is, even if it's not going to be old school in the way that you think of two great defenses going at it, in the way that Ravens Steelers was for so many years, still a very good Pittsburgh defense, albeit not going to have Alex Highsmith, which will hurt, but they still have TJ Watt. They still have Cam Hayward up front. So not as though that pass rush and that front is toothless by any stretch of the imagination. But they're going up against a Ravens offense that they're not going to stop. The question is, can they slow it down? Can they get some stops? Much in the same way that we were talking about this with the Cleveland game a few weeks back. And if you're the Ravens defense, it's, hey, you've had some extra time here to lick your wounds a little bit from, what happened in Cleveland a few weeks ago, what happened statistically against the Bengals, albeit in a victory. Have you made some change? Have you made some improvements here? Have you made any hay here in trying to make this thing better? Or are you going to let Russell Wilson throw the ball over your head to George Pickens and Mike Williams? Two guys who can certainly do that for you. So, hey, this game sells itself, whether it's at 1 o'clock or in prime time. I mean, it's a lot of excitement here, and I'm just looking forward to having a legitimate, very serious matchup here where we're not talking about, well, Lamar's not playing, or Pittsburgh doesn't have a quarterback, or, what's going on. These are two teams that, especially in the Ravens case, and Pittsburgh coming off of the Washington win, serious.
Well, they both expect to be
for
playing in
real.
January now, but whereas
Yeah.
we only expected one of them to be playing in January prior to a month ago. I don't know. They were 3-0, then they were 3-2. We're like, okay, they are,
Yeah.
and then they started winning again. And now this is where the measurement begins. And also the fact that, 6 of their last 8 games, whatever it is, are division games at this point. They haven't played the division games. And it feels like them getting a player that made a difference last week at the trading deadline, and them, I mean, Russell Wilson's almost a player they got. He wasn't there the first month and a half, right? So it feels like they've made this movement to be fortified for this moment. And I don't want to say it's their Super Bowl, but they got a lot of young guys that haven't played in playoff games or won playoff games or weren't around when Roethlisberger, other than Hayward, a couple guys, Fitzpatrick came in sort of at the end of that, a couple of the guys that have been around, other than Tomlin himself, who's been through all the wars. This is a buckle your chin strap game for that franchise, more so than for Marlon Humphrey or Ronnie Stanley or Roquan Smith or Lamar Jackson, who blew the AFC Championship game at home last year and played playoff games. The Steelers aren't of that pedigree as the current group is, but this is as good as it gets for them, and it's a real proving ground. And um, as I wrote at Baltimore Positive, it's a dangerous trip to Pittsburgh for you on Sunday.
Well, and your point's well taken about the fact that the Ravens were in the AFC title game last year, and obviously we've talked about this going back
The
to
Ravens have played a lot of big games and beaten
sure,
other teams'
sure,
asses. Go back and
but
look at the San Francisco game, and every
of
time
course,
we've woken up after the Buffalo game 6 weeks ago and thought, "No, Chris, up there, look how great they are," before they go to Cleveland and lose. But we've had a lot of those moments. Pittsburgh hadn't woken up ever on a morning where Mike Tomlin thought, "We're really good." Yeah, like I don't know when the last time the Steelers woke up. Monday could be that where they're like, "Ooh, we're good." The Ravens have been smelling themselves since Lamar got here.
yeah, I mean, like I said, Pittsburgh got off to that great start in 20. The weird COVID year, they were what 11-0, 10-0, something like that. So at that point, but even then, that was 4 years ago. At this point, that's an eternity in NFL time. So, but
Why is it
all
that I don't remember Pittsburgh being 10? Is it do I purposely try to not remember that? Is that true?
because I mean, I will say
You're gonna make me
this.
look that up.
It was kind of sort of like what we've seen from Kansas City, right? I mean, look, Kansas City's undefeated right now, taking nothing away from what they've done. 3 Super Bowls. We know what Patrick Mahomes and Kelsey are come January, and I fully expect them to be that again. And the Ravens and the Bills and anyone else that encounter them, they're going to have to go through Kansas City. But let's face it. Let's call a spade a spade. Kansas City is an undefeated outfit right now. They're not the 2007 Patriots the way, they're not destroying
It's not the
teams.
85 Bears.
Yeah, exactly. They're not blowing teams out on a weekly basis. And I think that's what Pittsburgh was that year. But bringing it back to the Ravens, as much as we're talking about January and this defense and making sure it's, it can get to a level where it's at least championship caliber, even if it's not going to be number one or top five or even top 10. It just needs to be better. But at the same time, and you mentioned the names, there are enough guys around, not that many, but there are enough. There are enough Marlon Humphreys and Ronnie Stanley's in the locker room. This team has lost 7 out of 8 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And again, I get it. Lamar didn't play in one of the games in 20. He didn't play in one of the games in 21. He didn't play in either game in 22. He sat out the last game last year, which we know was meaningless. And again, context and noise and all that being acknowledged, you still don't want to look at your record and say you're 1-7 against the Steelers over the last 4 years because if that doesn't matter, then this rivalry doesn't matter anymore, right? And that's we've kind of been talking about it. That's where the juice for this thing has gone. It has waned a little bit. So that's where you look at this thing and say, all right, Lamar's healthy. He's playing. He's not on the injury report this week. Hasn't missed the first couple days of practice this week. You're Kyle Hamilton, we're going to see. He was working out on a side field Wednesday. We'll see if he can log some practice time between now and Sunday. But overall, they're pretty healthy. They look healthier, let's say, than Pittsburgh, knowing that Pittsburgh at the very least is going to be without Highsmith, knowing what kind of player he is. So you're feeling better. And it begins with number 8. Again, he's going to suit up. He's going to play. This game matters. He's playing the best football of his career or equally meeting the best football of his career at any point. He's the MVP favorite, rightfully so. AFC Offensive Player of the Week again this past week. So it's go time. You're going on the road. You know how that road game in Cleveland went in terms of your first AFC North or second AFC North road game with the win in Cincinnati.
And this defense is going to bring it.
But right, exactly. You better play. And if you're Pittsburgh, there's the urgency of wanting to hold on to first place, but there's also the thought of you better hold court at home because you don't want to be in a position where you're must win going to Baltimore 4 days before Christmas or 5 days before Christmas for a Saturday game. So, I mean, the urgency is there. If I'm trying to step back and be objective, it might mean a little more to Pittsburgh in a big picture sense because of what we're saying. How real are they? They feel more real than they've been, but they're still not being talked about as a true top 5.
Well, they're the little bros on Monday if they lose at home to the Ravens.
But if they win, then wow, you're looking at this thing and you're saying, all right, when's the rematch? December 21st. All right, it's go time. I mean, can't wait for that one because, it's not as though this division's going to be decided on Sunday, but it's a really important data point in
Well, I know two
determining that.
teams that aren't winning the division, Cincinnati and Cleveland.
Yeah, exactly. So this is, I mean, this is big. You can tell I'm excited. I mean, we've talked about this. This team is in a position where there's so little they can do to really prove anything that really matters as it pertains to January, as it pertains to Super Bowl legacy for not just Lamar
Yeah,
Jackson, but this
I
entire
agree with
era.
that. They can only
Yeah.
lose feathers; they can't gain
Yeah.
any.
But I think this is as close as you get in terms of Lamar only has one win in games he started against Pittsburgh. And again, he played, go back and look, and I've seen a few people say that, talk about this on social. Go back and look at that game he played last year. Everyone was distracted because the Orioles were getting ready to play game 2 against the Rangers. And well, we know that didn't go so well. But that point aside, Lamar played fantastic football in that game until the final 7 minutes of the game where he went down with with the ship because well they dropped 7 passes in that game and George Pickens gets behind Marlon Humphrey for Pittsburgh's only touchdown and they lost a game they had no business losing. But Lamar still hasn't.
They do
Yeah,
that a lot, don't they? Every time they lose, we're like, they lost the game they have no business losing because most weeks they go in with more talent.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
don't know that that's the case this week. I don't, well, I watched Pittsburgh play last week. I don't think they're inept offensively at all. They have a Super Bowl MVP quarterback who's probably going to the Hall of Fame, who's trying to make his way in this thing. He's been there 5 minutes, so I don't know how to judge it any more than you know how to judge. He's played 3 weeks. So but I know that defense is real. And I saw that when they buckled the chin straps up. And I said, this kid down in D.C. is going to have a day. And I haven't really watched them play a lot this year. I mean, just not every minute of every day. They're the only other team I watch other than the Bengals where, like, when they're on, doesn't matter who they're playing. I try to keep an eye on them. But I specifically last week tuned in, turned up, watched the game, and thought, this is a formidable
Played well.
outfit. This is
They
a good
played well.
team.
Yeah.
But it's more than that, a good team, a capable defense, a defense you can win a Super Bowl with. Now, I don't met the rest of it, but better defense than the Ravens have right now, and not just on
Sure.
paper.
Yeah. I mean, it's not really close. I mean, I'd say this, and this is again where I thought their win over Washington was a nice litmus test for them, at least in terms of saying, all right, I don't, I'm still not buying them as serious Super Bowl contenders, but they're not pretenders either,
But they're
right?
a threat to the Ravens. They
Right,
can beat the
exactly,
Ravens.
exactly. So, I mean, these offenses, in terms of talent, it's not close, right? I mean, Pickens is a heck of a talent. He could certainly hurt you. I mean, they're good enough, and let's face it. I mean, if the Browns can do what they did against the Ravens defense, Pittsburgh certainly can. So, I'm not saying that in a context of, oh, I don't think Pittsburgh has enough talent to score points against the Ravens. I'm just saying if you're talking about these two offenses, it's no contest. But defenses, yeah, it's not as though I don't think the Ravens are devoid of talent on defense, but at some point it's like, I mean, the statistics, they don't lie 10 games into the season. I mean, your pass defense stinks, as we've said. So they've got to figure that out. I think they have enough talent that they can get better, but it's got to start showing up. And no better place for it to start showing up than Pittsburgh. I mean, one
What do
thing
you
I'd be
expect to
remiss.
happen, by the way? Do you expect Williams to be on the field or not? Or like, all of the talk, and we're working on this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they have some scheme issues for sure, right? And is not anything they can count on at all. And the preparedness for the run game that may not come. And then what happens on these third and longs and really communication. I wouldn't say they're incapable, that Brandon Stevens isn't fast enough to be a corner, but maybe is more suited to being a safety. But I don't know what that means for Wiggins, who they invested this draft capital in. Marlon Humphrey, they got a lot of money in. He hasn't always been healthy. But like, I don't know what their ideal setup is, because I look at it and say, all right, so they get their ass kicked this week by Russell Wilson. Whatever happens, what do they think is ideal by Christmas? 6 weeks from now, when they get into the playoffs, what will the secondary and good health, hopefully, but what's it going to look like? Who's playing nickel? Who's playing dime? What packages are we in? What are the sub packages? Do you want Roquan Smith on the field third down, even though you're paying a lot? Who are they subbing in and out in circumstances? Because whatever that's been, they really haven't had an answer. And they have moved personnel around. They've done things differently. They benched Marcus Williams a couple weeks ago. There have been different pieces in this, but I just don't know what their saying at 10 o'clock at night when they're up trying to figure it out last weekend when they had a little bit of time? What are they seeing that could be improved other than, I think, scheme?
Yeah, and I think that's where you have to really go to work because I just don't know. I've talked about this. You and I talked about this. I've opined about this, and other people have as well. It's not a unique idea. Do you try to get Nate Wiggins on the field a little more consistently? Does that cut into Brandon Stevens' time in any way? That's one thing you could do at corner, right? Safety, I I look at it, and obviously Hamilton isn't really a true safety, right? He moves around. The last thing I want to do is start playing Kyle Hamilton at a too high safety spot, which might clean up the overall operation, but really dings you in terms of upside and ceiling and maximizing what he can do for you as a player, right? So, it's like asking Ed Reed to just, stay back there and not do anything special. Just play assignment football and not do your calculated risks in the way that he would bait quarterbacks and do the things that made Ed Reed a Hall of Famer, right? So that's where it's tough for me because, okay, what about Ardarius Washington? We've seen Ardarius Washington play more so as a third safety. We haven't seen him just step into the starting lineup in the little bit that they run base. I mean, they run a lot of three safety looks as it is. So, when you look at the numbers that you kind of say, okay, well, that's Marcus Williams or Eddie Jackson. To your point, they've already benched Marcus Williams. They benched Eddie Jackson the following week. He was deactivated. So I don't know if there's a personnel move to be made there, really. Roquan Smith, look, we've talked about this. Has Roquan looked like a $20 million linebacker in coverage this year? No, but does that mean that I have the confidence that suddenly you're just going to send Trenton Simpson out there more and expose him more in coverage and ask him to do a lot of things that, frankly, you didn't even ask Patrick Queen to do over the last couple of years? I don't think that's the solution either. So again,
But
I
in the
think you
case
look
of
at
Smith, is he slow or is he ill? Is he ill assigned or ill aligned or?
maybe it's yes, maybe it's maybe it's a combination of both. And you know this, Nestor, and I'm not suggesting that you're implying this. It's never just one thing. I mean, it's not. I think there is a combination of ideas at work here, and we've talked about this in passing. And as much as we just talk about scheme in a very general sense, let's also remember look at the fact that, okay, Mike McDonald leaves and goes to Seattle, but Denard Wilson, who was really credited for getting that secondary playing at a very high level, he departs and he's the coordinator in Tennessee now. Uh, you have
Anthony
Anthony
Weaver.
Weaver down in Miami, which the Dolphins got off to a really rough start. They've played better defense the last few weeks. So it's not just that Zach Orr's in his first year as a defensive coordinator. It's those assistants on top of that and then you look at the assistants you brought in, and I say this with no disrespect, and I'm not even going to name their names because it's not as though I've identified like, oh, well, Doug Mallory or whoever they brought in to replace those guys, but they weren't these expansively impressive NFL resume position coaches. There are guys that coached at the collegiate level, some guys that, not saying that they were complete strangers to the NFL, but the point was they weren't these long-standing position coaches in the NFL in the way that, when you brought in Anthony Weaver, he had already coached in Houston, or Joe Cullen, when he was their defensive line coach, or, you look at some of these coaches that are more experienced. That's why I kind of said all along, in hindsight, you probably should have just brought Dean Pease in training camp if he would have been willing to do it at the time, right? And you could have done that then or someone like that, someone that still has something to offer, but maybe isn't looking to be a defensive coordinator at this stage. So I do think the amount of movement, and again, this is not absolving Zach or any one individual. It's all encompassing. Looking at all that when you bust some pipes then and you're leaking in multiple places and you're having these issues, that it can be tough and it kind of piles up. It kind of builds up, and you know
Well, and
it's
also your weaknesses get exploited.
they
I mean,
do.
they're studied every single
Yeah,
week. And Joe Burrow says, I can F up a couple times today or whatever, but when, when it comes time, you can't stop Jamar and
but
we're going to have a play. There's going to be one play and we're going to burn you, and that's when we're going to get our 6 points. Doesn't need to be every play, doesn't need to be on first down, doesn't need to be on this drive, but we're going to figure it out, and that's what studying these defenses does. And I think that that's what worries me a little bit more about this game specifically, is that this familiarity has tended to breed a little better look at the Ravens. That's all.
Yeah, and that's fair. I will say this, if you're looking for a silver lining, and this isn't a scheme fix, because again, I don't really know what they're going to do, and I'm not going to sit here like I'm Rex Ryan or someone that's going to tell you, oh, here's how you fix the Ravens defense right now. Because again, I don't think it's ever that simple, especially for someone who's watching from the outside and isn't going to have the best picture as far as what exactly is going on behind closed doors. But I'll say this. Where has the Ravens' biggest weakness been? It's been over the middle of the field, right? Over the linebackers in front of the safeties. Now, they've been beaten deep as well, and I'm not saying that their outside coverage has been perfect, Brandon Stevens specifically, although if you kind of look at passing charts every week, teams are trying to avoid Marlon Humphrey because Marlon Humphrey's played high-level football when he's been out on the field. So you do have that. However, I mentioned the weakness of the middle of the field. Go look at Russell Wilson over the last few weeks. When he's made plays, it generally has not been over the middle of the field. It's been on the outside. So I am going to be fascinated more so on the Pittsburgh side if Russell Wilson and the Steelers try to exploit that a little bit more. It's easier said than done. Ask any quarterback. You have some guys who are better throwing to the outside, and you have other guys like Lamar Jackson almost from day one, and it's why Lamar loves throwing the tight ends, who has been fantastic as a passer between the numbers. The question for Lamar earlier in his career was always what? Throwing outside the numbers and throwing outside, which is something he's gotten so much better at, but you would still say he's better throwing over the middle of the field, right? And that's fine, because if you can do that, it's really tough for a defense to stop it. So I think that's where I think one of the biggest keys for this game is, one, have the Ravens come up with some answers for that and improving that area of the field, because that's been a sieve all year long for them, whether we're talking about tight ends or crossers or whatever.
By the way, that's a good game for Russell Wilson to play too. That part of the game, to exploit that part of the field.
It is, but again, he hasn't done that though, is what I'm saying. Like those first few games, go look at the passing charts. He hasn't really thrown over the middle a whole lot. Now, I'll say this. I certainly think Pat Fryermuth's more than capable of, and he did catch a touchdown this past week, but I'll be interested to see if they really try to exploit that, if they really try to attack what the Ravens' weaknesses are, or do they say, hey, this is still something that Russ does better than being over the middle of the field? And they've had their issues stopping guys on the outside anyway. So I do think that's an interesting dynamic to that matchup specifically. So we're going to see. I think, Tre'Davious White has practiced this week. Obviously, you and I talked about him briefly as he came in, right before the Cincinnati game. Too early for him to be in the mix there. Do I expect to see him on the field? I think that's TBD, right? I mean, let's face it, the Rams didn't exactly have the best pass defense, and he was a healthy scratch for them multiple weeks. So Tre'Davious White's got to prove that he still has something left, and he's just been decimated by injuries. Do we see him on the field a little bit here or there? Maybe. Do I expect to see him starting or anything like that? No, not at this point. So, but again, you had the mini bye coming out of the Thursday night game. You had the entire weekend to not just get ready for the Steelers, but survey where you are as a defense. I am interested to see if there's a wrinkle that we haven't seen yet. Again, they've been throwing ish against the wall. We've talked about that. I mean, they waived Yannick Ngakoue last week, who had been their number 3 outside linebacker at one point. So, I think you want to see progress. Again, do I expect them to hold them to 7 points or 10 points? No, of course not. But if you let Russell Wilson hang 33 on you and you lose 33-30, I mean, again, you're looking at this thing and saying your offense is championship caliber, but your defense feels capable of getting beat by just about anyone, but I guess a rookie quarterback or Josh Allen back in week 4, right? I mean, that's what we're kind of talking about right now. So you want to see progress. And again, what that looks like, do you try to play? I've seen some people on social media kind of look at some of the splits with zone versus man, I think that's overly simplistic, but do you see some wrinkles there? Do you see a few more man looks? Do you see different type of zone? I don't know, but it's got to be better. I mean, it just
Well,
has to be
man's
better.
dangerous for this defense, right? For me, because it just feels like it could be
I mean,
exploited too
it
easily.
could be, but I don't know if the lousy. I hear what you're saying. Fundamentally, I would agree with you, but coverage has been all. I mean, the problem is they've been pretty good both, right? I mean, that's kind of the overly simplistic way of viewing it. But we kind of just look man versus zone. I mean, that's like saying running the ball versus passing the ball, right? I mean, there are so many different concepts and blocking schemes and everything that goes into offense rather than just run versus pass. It's the same thing with man versus zone. So I don't know. I mean, I'm intrigued to see what it looks like. I'm intrigued to
Russell
see.
Wilson would love to have man on the outside with Pickens 6 to 8 times
Against
on
Brandon
Sunday,
Stevens. Yeah,
and say
sure.
I'll make 2 or 3 of those work, and I'll
Yeah,
beat you because of it.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I mean, especially if the safety help doesn't come in the way that you expect it to,
Oh, but
which
in
is
man, if there's any confusion at all, you're in trouble. At least in zone, somebody can catch you and tackle you.
yeah.
Maybe.
Although we've seen them play such bad zone coverage on the back end that
Oh, in the middle especially,
yeah,
because once
exactly,
Marcus Williams
exactly.
gets hips go the wrong way, it's over.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's where I really look at this. I'm
And
really
that's where
curious.
veteran quarterbacks will kill you.
Yeah, but that's where I am curious. I mean, we know Russ, even going back to Denver, if there was a saving grace to his game, it was still that he still threw those moonball deep balls that still had great accuracy. I mean, that was the only thing he had going for him in Denver at the end. But I am curious because of how obvious the Ravens have had that weakness on those over routes, over the linebackers in front of the safeties. Again, not that they haven't had issues on the outside at times too, but do we see them try to exploit that with more crossers and getting Fryermuth involved a little bit more? I'll be intrigued. Or again, because we're only talking about a few starts here that Russell Wilson's made. Do we see them still try to stick with what they do best, and we'll see how that works out. But I mean, again, the Ravens, you need to see progress defensively. For as much as we're talking about Russ and tipping your cap, and Pickens can make plays, and Mike Williams made a play even though he didn't even know the offense, right? I mean, Russell Wilson had to tell him what to do on the play where he catches the touchdown. But I mean, this is not a juggernaut. This is not peak Ben Roethlisberger throwing to Antonio Brown. Let's be clear about that too. Let's not give the opposition too much credit here. In the same way that if Jamar Chase got to play the Ravens, he'd be a 3,000-yard receiver if he played the Ravens every week, the way he's going this year. So give your opponent credit, but not too much credit here. This is not a great Pittsburgh offense, but this is it's not even an average pass defense for the Ravens right now. So they've got a lot to prove. And again, I have all the confidence that Lamar and the offense will score points. I'm not saying they're going to score 40 because it is a very good Pittsburgh defense, but they'll score points. They're not going to get shut down. But boy, if you can't get stops and if Russell Wilson's throwing all over you, and I mean, I fear, what happened against Cleveland a few weeks ago. Why wouldn't you think that couldn't happen on Sunday if your pass defense isn't going to be much better than it's been?
You've called it weird a little bit. I mean, it is Russell Wilson running the Steelers, and this juggernaut offense that the Ravens have, and this imbalanced team,
Yeah.
like this wildly imbalanced team. And I'm surprised you and I didn't take more grief over the weekend from the sycophants, just in the fact that we were a little less than ebullient about the victory against the Bengals, and saying, how many times is the defense going to let down in a fourth quarter? And knowing that January, that's unacceptable, and we're getting into late November at this point, I would just like to see the defense improve, not just a victory. I don't want to say style points. I think it needs to be a victory, some semblance of style points, to start showing us that this defense could win a championship, because I don't think, as it's comprised right now, as our confidence level is right now, the way the pass rush is right now, even as all world as the offense is, I think we have concerns because defense wins championships, Luke Jones.
Well, defense doesn't win championships. On the flip side, you still need your defense to play well with even with an elite offense, right?
Dude, it would
I,
be something crazy if they finished 27th ranked defense and still win 12 games somehow and win the Super Bowl with that.
well,
Like that's just that's be a very big outlier.
it is, but and I've seen people use this example. I mean, look at the '06 Colts. Painful to think about that because the Ravens were in the middle of that run. But you remember what the narrative was about
Your defense
Indianapolis
was
at the
good
end of
enough at
that
one
year.
night.
Their run defense at the end of that year was horrendous. They had the worst run defense in football. They get Bob Sanders back, and their defense played well. It played well enough in the same, you look at these runs. I mean, Joe Flacco in the 2012 postseason. Go look at Joe's regular season numbers that year. That was far from Joe's best season. I mean, he wasn't all that great. Wasn't all that good in that 2012 regular
You mean
season.
backup quarterback at the Indianapolis Colts team,
Right,
Joe
right.
Flacco.
But he went on that run. So, you know, look, Lamar Jackson is playing at such a high level. This offense is playing at such a high level. It has so much talent. You've added Keaton Mitchell back into the picture now. We'll see what that looks like. You have Deontay Johnson, who's still not involved yet as a receiver, in addition to everything else you have. By the way, Isaiah Likely back on the practice field. We'll see if he goes with the hamstring. But you have this this embarrassment of riches with their offense that, look, they got to do it in January. We know that. Everyone knows that. But everything they've done to this point gives me the utmost confidence with the way Lamar Jackson's playing that there's nothing else he could do right now in mid-November to give me any more confidence than what I do in him and that offense right now. So it's not that far that the defense has to go, but it does need to be better, right? But because everything is judged on January, right? We know this. We've talked about this. This has been the case for a few years now. It's a compliment to this organization that we're saying that. This organization isn't about regular season awards and who makes it to the Pro Bowl and what your statistical profile is.
Or being player of the week again.
Right, which is great. Those are all great things, but they're not what ultimately people remember in terms of legacy, right? And I've heard people say this, and I think it tends to be younger people. So I'm going to pick on younger people here for a second. I've heard some people say, well, Dan Marino never won a Super Bowl. Yeah, it's everything whenever someone mentions Dan Marino, yes, we know Hall of Famer. What's the next thing they bring up? Never won a Super Bowl, right? So I don't want that for Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's going to be a Hall of Fame player one day. And everything about him is incredible when you talk about the fact that he's on the verge of being a 3-time MVP in the same way Johnny Unitas was, right? I mean, think about that for a moment. Here in Baltimore, that's what we're talking about here. But the first thing he would tell you, the first thing he wants to accomplish is win a Super Bowl. So everything that's going right with the offense, awesome, right? And look, it may still come down to it. If the offense plays at such a high level, maybe they can outscore everyone. I mean, it's happened in some, rare instances, but it has happened. But boy, you just look at it and you say, if you lost to the Raiders, knowing how awful that team is, if you lost to the Browns, knowing how awful that team is, and largely because of your defense, right? Not that the offense was perfect in those games, but certainly the defense, and especially late in the game.
Well, you force your offense to be a lot more perfect when your defense is no good.
Right. Your margin for error. I mean, the thing I'd say about this, I mean, this offense is absolutely better than last year's offense, but last year's team was so good offensively, defensively, and yeah, I'll even throw special teams in there as well because we know the special teams haven't been as good for this football team. When you're having a defense that's having the issues that it has, and even throw in the special teams and especially the Justin Tucker thing, which we both agree is a thing. I don't know how big of a thing, but it's a thing, and that's problematic to some degree until it's not. That you just look at this and say, you do have, even with your offense playing franchise historic kind of football, you do have a smaller margin for error then, because if that offense is just off a little bit here or there, then boy, you don't feel nearly as confident. Whereas last year you could say, well, the defense could be off a little bit or here or there, and the offense will pick it up or vice versa. So you want to get better because it's all about January. It is. This isn't about finishing 13-4 or you want to be in position to play home playoff games even if the number 1 seed looks like a more of a long shot at this point in time, but who knows? I mean, Buffalo plays Kansas City this week. Depending on that outcome, we could be having a different story at that point. But this is all about January. So that's where we look at this defense and you keep saying, what is this? I mean, and it's just so it's so striking because it's just so out of character. As I wrote at Baltimore Positive, and I think I said this to you in our conversations. I mean, it's Bizarro, the Bizarro Ravens, right? I mean, Bizarro Superman. Go look it up. I know you're not a comic book guy, but
Well, I got the
uh,
Spider-Man thing going on at the Lyric this weekend,
yeah,
so I'm
yeah, you
trying
do.
that. Yeah.
But it's just one of those deals where I mean the history of this franchise until Lamar came along was great defense and always questioning the offense, and now it's the exact opposite. It's 1996 all over again, except Vinny Testaverde not what Lamar Jackson is right now, but it's the same principle.
And
This
Schwartz isn't
offense,
buying me sandwiches and talking
yeah,
about, Ike Booth and Donnie Brady.
yeah. And how good that rookie that kid Ray Lewis is,
At
and that's
52's
yeah,
flying around out there. We'll never
not much
remember Pepper
else.
Johnson around here.
Yeah.
Luke Jones is Baltimore Luke. He is on his way out to Owings Mills, on his way to Pittsburgh, and back again here this weekend. You can follow him at Baltimore Luke. You can follow our Maryland Crab Cake Tour all the way to Greenmount Station next Thursday. We'll be there with Raven Scratch-Offs in the Maryland Lottery. Also, our friends at Jiffy Lube Multicare powering us up for that. We have a whole litany of dates together. We're going to be at Cooper's North in December. We're at Coco's in December 4th. We're at Costas. We're going to be down at Fadley's for Christmas. We're shipping crab cakes everywhere as we get through Thanksgiving. And anything you want to do before you drop the mic here before game time? It's Sunday at 1 o'clock.
I mean, I'm just looking forward to this. I really am. I think we've talked about this a lot. Ravens Steelers has not been Ravens Steelers for a long time. Beyond just the legacy, that it's just like Washington Dallas or Bears Packers, just one of these legacy rivalries, that will persist. But the last 4 or 5 years, beginning with Lamar, is just frequent absences for a variety of reasons, right? Some of them coach's decision and some of them being, COVID or injury. So that excites me right off the bat. And look, I mean, the Ravens, this is a big game. You want to win the division. You don't want to be in a position where you're a game and a half back and you're in a position where you don't want to be losing the tiebreaker in the return bout then, right? So it's big on that front for Pittsburgh. Okay, beating Washington, good job, but that's not the same as if you beat Lamar Jackson and the Ravens and you hold their offense in relative check, let's say, and you don't give up 40 or 35 as the Ravens are able to do. And if your offense with Russell Wilson at the helm exploits the Ravens the way, maybe not to the degree of Cincinnati, but not far off. If that something like that happens, then boy, it's game on the rest of the year for this AFC North. And again, nothing's decided Sunday one way or the other, but Pittsburgh has a chance to make a statement. And for the Ravens, it's a chance to go beat the Steelers, right? We know all these games have been weird. We know a lot. Some of them haven't meant anything and all. Just beat the, come on. You're 1-7 in the last 4 years against the Steelers. It's time to end that. Lamar's playing. Go take care of business on Sunday. So I'm looking forward to it. A big game, and certainly the return bout in mid-December will be big as well. But just feels good, even if it's not in prime time. Feels good to have a Ravens Steelers game this late in the season carry this kind of juice.
Well, we got the juice around here at Baltimore Positive and AM 1570 all week long. We're going to be doing a special music week next week as we get ready for the Chargers, get ready for Turkey Day, get ready for our Maryland Crab Cake Tour to get back out on the road. I'm looking forward to that. You know how much I love that Greenmount Station crab cake up there because it tastes like Angelina's, which is old school for me. We'll have the lottery tickets to give away. And don't forget, our Oyster Tour is also underway, brought to you by Curio Wellness Far and Dotter, as well as 1-800, I keep going to the water, Liberty Pure Solutions, 1-800 Clean Water. My pal Doug doing that, as well as doing all the plumbing stuff that we do around here. Big weeks ahead. I mean, football on the mind, football on the spirit, and an extra day next week, a couple extra days this week. They don't play 3 out of 4 Sundays in a row. This is the only Sunday they play the next couple of weeks at 1 o'clock on a Sunday. After that, it's Monday and bye, and then all the weird Christmas stuff that's going on later on, and Saturday nights and Wednesdays and all that stuff. So I enjoy a normal and I say normal, Sunday at 1 o'clock. Steelers and Ravens in Pittsburgh. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We'll be covering the game in progress on our X and our Blue Sky and all the threads and all the place all the cool kids are going. We're fascist. Hopefully don't live anymore. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking. Baltimore, positive.